Okay. Great panel we've assembled today. It's been a good morning. Minette Batters earlier on as well. Mark White, good grouping. We had, you can throw them on the floor, it doesn't matter. Samantha Lynn, Tindaya Godfrey, and then Chris Newnham, who's around and about, our main man and worshipful company of fruiterers. But we've got a great panel. Today, someone has already been talking about rugby, which is surprising because Australia went out in the early rounds, but not so much a follower, but more of a player in her younger days, and maybe recently might still be playing. Number 8. So if the Baroness says it's Christmas, I'm singing carols because she was a number 8, and that was good. Obviously, Green Party peer. Lived on 3 continents, as I say, one of our finest Australian imports, and we're delighted to have her. And anyone who's named after a district of Sheffield or has chosen that as a moniker, Manor Castle, and Castle is how we say it there. Brilliant. So that's Baroness Natalie Bennett. Hello, greetings to you, Natalie. Mark Lumsdon-Taylor. We bonded over coffee and swearing earlier on. He was on the phone. Didn't like the news he heard, but he was very, very gentlemanly about it, of course. And rebranding the company, I've got McIntyre Hudson, might be MH, we'll find out in a minute. And chartered accountant and corporate financier, special interests in food and farming and rural businesses, has been doing that one for a while, maybe since his early days when he was at Manchester Met, and then graduated, also went to Keele University and Gresham School in Norfolk. So I have been doing my stalker homework. So well done to you. And then Catherine Lloyd, of course, thank you so much. She's built the stand, she's done all the stuff. Gullands, what a great company. Gullard and Gullard originally, but we're going back to it's quite a long way, but great story. In fact, there was a Mancunian who came down, and it was his son who set it all up, and done all the elements there. Obviously a senior partner at Gullands, and also the Under Sheriff of Kent. And relaxes by. She's a very useful sailor and cycler and running and doing all the things that you need to do when apart from your busy work life. And then finally, Savills. I was at Cirencester Land Agency for my sins. This is one of our associate directors, Stuart Nicholls, really delighted to hear. Food and farming for nigh on a decade has been the main man. Obviously went straight from school to do that. Just great that you are involved with them. University of Nottingham, Sir Henry Floyd Grammar School, which Aylesbury, isn't it? Yeah, because I'm near Berkhamsted, so there you go. You still living around there? No, I thought you might be down here for some reason. I thought it'd be quite a long commute, or maybe you got family there. Anyway, lots to talk about. I mean, about issues of the day. It's the rural policy group, and there is a lot to discuss, particularly at the moment, because as Minette Batters was saying earlier on, her tenure finishes in February, but obviously we're now looking towards elections and things, so it's a matter of whether governments will commit to what they said before, or whether or not they'll even deliver on money or go back on. There's a lot of volte-facing going on at the moment. We will be discussing that. But also one thing which has been a real headline grabber, you will have been aware of it, but it's been brewing for a while, but the Rosebank oil field, huge issue coming up in Scotland, and the SNP, climate denial and all this type of thing, but they're fuming at that, but obviously this is all happening. Is it a really remarkable thing that we don't need to rely on Putin and all his cronies, or is there going to be an environmental side with that? Natalie, can I start with you? What are your thoughts on it? There should be a microphone each. Here you go. You have that one. See if that one works. There you go, Ed.
Yep, testing.
Yep, great. Testing 5-4. Here we go. Yes, what are your thoughts?
Oh, gosh, you threw out a lot out there.
Yeah, just about Rosebank, particularly.
Okay, so to start on Rosebank to start off with, I mean, we have a climate emergency. The International Energy Agency, who are not known as a radical greenie organisation, says we cannot have any new oil and gas. And, of interest to Mark and others here, what we're doing is creating a huge amount of stranded assets. We are, at some point very soon, going to have to stop pumping that oil and gas. If money is put into that, it's going to be sitting there where there's a huge financial risk. It's known as a carbon bubble. So there's the financial aspect. There's the if we do pump it, then we are literally blowing up the climate. And, all the beautiful fruit that we've got seen growing around here is not going to make it because we will have a totally blown up climate. And the other thing to say is, the idea that, first of all, we do not rely on Putin for oil or gas. We have to change our systems. And it takes, the government minister acknowledged this to me the other day, it takes about 26 years from start to produce a new, to get producing oil out of that rosebank. This is not, it's all gesture. What you said to, we are now in an election campaign. The government is treating Rosebank as it's treating the supposedly pro-car as part of a culture war. But this has real-world consequences. We cannot be playing games.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. No way you stand on that one. Stuart, might be slightly out of the remit on the food and farming side, but what are your thoughts about it?
I think probably from a food and farming perspective, when we look at the inflationary pressures we've seen in the sector over the last couple of years, fertiliser prices, red diesel prices, so anything that we can to control those prices and make them manageable, affordable within the sector, and mitigate the impact of food inflation to the British economy will be a benefit. So yes, slightly outside of my remit, but anything that we can do to control prices within the sector, if that feeds down, would be welcome. Yeah.
I think it's one of those that will definitely divide people because there'll be. Yeah.
Can I just come back on that, pointing out that, of course, all of this is sold on the world market. There's not enough supply in Rosebank to make any difference on a global scale to the price. So this is not cheap oil and gas.
Yeah. Catherine, again, a long way from us as such. We're all right here, in Kent. But again, is it initially thinking, well, that's okay. We've got, we could deal a bit. We're here. We're producing. Or no, that's not the way forward. We've got to look at alternatives. And as just mentioned there by Natalie, just saying that it's going to take quite a long time to come to fruition anyway.
I agree with that, and I think this could present.
Ed, Catherine's a bit quiet there. We'll just.
Is that better? Everyone?
Yeah, just to let them know that was microphone. What numbers on that one? That's done. Hello.
Oh, there's always one.
Yeah. All right. There you go.
Yes, what I've been reflecting is actually this could represent a great, albeit different opportunity for our landowners looking to the renewables and in particular solar farms. That's a cleaner, greener, obviously, way of delivering on some of our energy needs. And for landowners out there, often solar is considered by the general public actually to be quite a good form of diversification. The solar panels sit obviously quite low to the ground and are not considered therefore too obtrusive or unattractive if it happens on your doorstep.
Yeah.
So I think that would be a much better way forward.
Yeah, good. And Mark, well done. I can see just a little bit of just brushing up as well. Where is it? It's something that you... Yeah. Keep talking.
Is that working?
Yeah, just maybe, Ed, if you could just turn Mark up a touch on this one.
So part of my day job is I head up sustainability for the UK. So I have quite a corporate view on this, and there is a lot of rhetoric around this. For sure, we've got a climate situation. I mean, did everyone, as I would say this, did everyone enjoy October and get a good suntan? Yeah, is that good for you? That didn't happen 2 years ago, did it? Or even a year ago. So the Rosebank situation, I think there's political rhetoric around it, and obviously we're non-partisan, so we don't have a political view on it, but what is the material difference it's actually going to make in supply, in reality? What I think needs to happen is there needs to be a balance or a joined-up framework, if you like, between renewables, fossil fuels, and a pathway to do this. The reason why I was showing expletives about half an hour ago was because a colleague of mine had just read a report from the IPCC saying that the 2-degree barrier, which is where it's being assessed at the minute by the UN, is more likely to hit 2.5 on our current trajectory. And there is a brilliant graph that was issued by the UN, I think about 3 months ago now, that showed our trajectory of where we are now, doing nothing, doing what we've said we're going to do, and then changing that. And we've got to change the way we do things, absolutely holistically across the world. Otherwise, it's just simply not going to happen. They said that they needed to reduce, to get us on track, greenhouse gases across the world by 45% by 2030. That was the target. And they're saying it's not going to be achieved. We're in 2023 now. They said that in 2018. It's not going to happen. So The problem is with the Rosebank thing and others, it's just another soundbite, another policy thrown out there. Drop out some licenses. Where's the joined up energy strategy? So I do agree with Natalie. I don't always agree with Natalie, but in this situation I do. There needs to be a joined up framework, because as businesses, you need to be assured on policy to then enable you to plan and invest and decide what you're going to do with your money.
Yes, for sure. And that's a big. I will come back to that, the joined up thinking, I'm sure, because it is so massive. And the fact we're having this debate, and it's a debate you hear a lot more. BNG, biodiversity net gain, what was promised, what wasn't, the new building, all the different elements to that. I'm sure, with Savills, again, it's a really interesting bit there, Stuart, is that we need new properties, but also it's important that they're built in the right way. They're back into the environment. There was, supposed to, was it 10%? Was it 20%? We're putting back into making sure that the ground that it's built on, that's sustainable for the future. Where are we? What are you as a company when you're involved with projects like this?
So I think just picking up on your BNG point there, there's obviously a lot of work going into that sector. It's a particular interest with Savills, where we've obviously got the development side, planning, and then the rural side. So from a business, we're looking at it that in effect you can be a one-stop shop where you've got your developers looking for sites which a rural side can supply, and then supplying that BNG. So as a business, there's a huge market opportunity there. The policy uncertainty, the changes from the rowing back on nutrient neutrality, which then got reversed, the delay to BNG pushing it into next year, it's all adding uncertainty around the market, which is adding pressures. It's delaying factors. It's slowing up the planning system, and there's a large uncertainty from people looking to invest in that sector, but also farmers looking to contribute, landers looking to commit to provide the BNG offsetting sites. So as a business, lots of opportunity, lots of potential, but it's just when that gets unlocked and how it gets unlocked, really. That's the point. It's the uncertainty. Catherine, you sometimes wear two different hats with your Kent side, under Sheriff of Kent, but also as a lawyer, either acting on behalf of clients, what have you. What are your thoughts on the fact that it did get dialed back recently?
I think that's added a lot of challenge to both landowners and developers in knowing what is the best way forward. Developer clients of mine struggle to, in particular, get their Section 106 agreements from borough and district councils in a timely fashion. They don't really seem to have recovered from the pandemic, so that is slowing down often much needed development. And obviously it's uncertainty for the landowners who don't know how they might move into different areas, if it's going to be residential development or diversifying your crops, and so it's, I think, become a real challenge for everybody.
Yeah, and I think, and by the way, if any questions as we go along, just stick your hands up. I'm happy to come amongst you and with a microphone, rather than, because there will be different topics that we're going to cover. But Mark, you talked about grown-up thinking earlier on, as we should do that. That's a good example, and maybe not. So I was just thinking, well, come on, what is happening? Unless there's a clear voice telling you what, and certainly if people are going to go ahead and develop a site, they need to know what that actually means. Yeah. I
think what you've just said is a really valid point. All development requires planning permission, right? And therefore requires local council assent, and obviously, regional council, local council, and obviously parish councils, which are always a laugh, as we know. Sat through a few of those in my time, and unfortunately, they're not equipped, in my view, or educated enough to understand what the environmental policies are and what actually true environmentalism is. Furthermore, BNG means different things to different people. What it means to an individual is quite different to what it means to a corporate. And I have a very strong view about carbon credits. It is the Wild West out there. It is unregulated. The EU have specifically not chosen to regulate it, and I was in Brussels literally 3 weeks ago having this conversation with senior officials there, because they don't believe it is a sector that is actually going to contribute positively. Because, as I said to a colleague earlier, somebody tries to agree and has a carbon credits agreement for 50 acres, 100 acres of land. They do a sequestering deal to, for, let's say, British Telecom, for example, to offset it within their green strategies. And then what do they do with the land after 5 years? Dig it all up, release all the carbon. So what they're going to do, give that 5 years worth of payments back? Yeah, crack on. It is absolute the Wild West, and I've seen some horror stories. So the UK haven't regulated it yet. If there is anything to happen in the future, I think it's not a priority. I think what is a priority is for BNG per se, there should be rules and regulations around it that are clear and understandable for business so they can implement good policies. Because there is some good stuff out there. I'm not damning the whole thing. I think there is some really good opportunities, but it is a lack of education and clarity. And I'll just give you one important fact. So the UK were the leads for business regulation in 2019. They were well ahead of everybody else, and they adopted what's known as Task Force Climate-Related Disclosures. It's big regulation for large businesses, and something that some of you may need to deal with. Reporting your carbon emissions, it's called SECR and ESOS. I won't bore you with the details of that, but we were well ahead by about 2 years. And then what did we do? We sat on our hands. And what was said by, I don't know which minister it was, there's been so many, but they said by 2025, they would put in regulations for medium-sized companies, i.e. businesses around up to 28 million pound turnovers, for how they report and how they can basically benefit from environmental policies and processes with the whole of UK. And we haven't heard a thing. So I think Europe have done that and they've gone ahead. So I think Europe is now ahead, we're behind. I think there's a real opportunity for us to get this right if the government and the legislators put in proper, clear rules for businesses to follow. Individuals is slightly different. I take that. There are two things. But I think that would really work, and it would help people like yourself, my colleague lawyers and accountants sitting together. It's a laugh.
But I think if I may pick up on one of Mark's points, we are to some extent here, or whether developers or landowners, in the hands of our planning authorities, and I'm afraid they are woefully under-resourced. Admittedly, it was back in 2020. I have waited 8 months for a draft Section 106 agreement, and that has a real commercial knock-on and impact on both landowners and developers trying to get commercial deals done. And if we're going to, as you say, introduce additional responsibilities and obligations on our local authorities in the shape of BNG and other sort of environmental enforcement and oversight, they're really going to struggle.
Yeah, Natalie, you're nodding there, but carbon offsetting generally, I mean, it's like a massive topic, really. What does it actually mean, and how would you like it to mean and to work? But what you've had a reality of it.
Okay, I'll get to that big question in a second, but just to very briefly start on your point about local government. I mean, and I should, if I was in the House, I would declare my position as Vice President of the Local Government Association. But they've seen overall a 27% cut in real terms in funding from central government. That's austerity. They've been slashed away, and essentially they're only delivering their statutory responsibilities. You think about what the cost of children in care, what the cost of social care is. There is no resources.
And I would wholeheartedly agree with that and lament that. Before my 7 years I've been there with Gullands, I was in-house at KCC, and exactly from 2009 to 2016 the mantra was you will all be doing more with less, and it's not sustainable, and I don't quite know where we go, but all our local authorities are woefully underfunded and we are asking too much of them.
And that's the point I really want to make in terms of the systemic problems. It's very easy to point to individuals and say, why on earth did you suddenly have a brainwave on the weekend and announce you were going to abolish nutrient neutrality and not even have any understanding? I mean, I had a couple of days later people who had really big schemes just ringing up and screaming and saying the government doesn't even understand and realise that they have destroyed our entire business. And then, of course, the House of Lords stands up against the government and the government goes back again. And that's not creating the environment. And it's easy to blame individuals for this. But actually what's underlying this is a structural problem, that we have a dysfunctional system of government. And that's both the fact that we're not creating stable, secure policy at a national level, and we also have far too much money and resources concentrated in the centre, in Westminster. Most people don't realise how compared to most European countries, money and resources and power are focused in Westminster, and the local council is effectively being forced to act like an agent of central government. And the answer to this is genuine devolution of power and resources to local areas so they can make the decisions at the right local level. So sorry, that was just responding to all of that. To pick up your point about carbon offsetting, I mean, at a basic level, carbon offsetting is a con. I am going to say that, let's imagine, your company that goes, right, we're just going to keep burning fossil fuels, but hey, we'll plant some trees.
Yes.
And, as Mark said, how long are those trees going to be there? If you look at, the extreme ridiculousness of Drax, which is cutting down old growth forests in North America, turning them into pellets, shipping them across the ocean, burning them, and saying, oh, but the trees will grow back. And in 100 years, we'll have nice big trees storing lots of carbon. We are in a climate emergency. We've got 10 years. We have to both do all of these things, look after that natural world, restore our wetlands, restore our ponds, restore our hedges, restore our forests, and stop burning the fossil fuels. This is not an either-or scenario.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's and the central government getting devolved, that's a big issue, and it's a huge political issue. It's right, it makes sense, and at times that has happened, but it's been dragged back in. It's really weird. Mark,
all I was just going to say was, there's nothing wrong with planting trees. I mean, but it shouldn't be used as an excuse not to reduce your emissions. So, to give you an example, we do it for we have the MHA forest. So for every new member of staff we appoint, we plant trees. Now, that's something that we do, but it has no bearing on how we're going down and reducing our scope emissions as part of our strategy for the firm. It's just something else we choose to do because the next generation want to see more of that. And I think that's absolutely right. So, yeah, I think it's a really dangerous word and a really dangerous area. And I know I use the phrase, but it is the Wild West. And you only need to look at some of the corporate scandals or the corporate greenwashing that has been going on. And in the EU, they now fine you. So if you're reporting on your financial reports or your statements that are published that investors use, you will get fined large sums of money. And so Europe is taking it increasingly seriously and are legislating it as such. I would expect if the UK wants to remain competitive, and a lot of businesses have European operations, multi-jurisdictional, I imagine that UK, depending what happens next year, will have to follow suit in some form just to remain competitive. So whether businesses like it or not, it's going to come.
Plus carbon border tax in the EU.
And the CBT is actually already carbon. Well, we'll probably get onto that, but the carbon border tax has now been implemented by the EU. Sorry, it's legislated. It comes in January, doesn't it? I think.
Well, they're bringing it in on a trial basis for a couple of years, but people are going to have to report it, and in a couple of years, we in the UK are going to be paying lots of money to the EU because of the carbon border tax.
It's basically if you can get something in the EU that's going to cost less carbon, but you're choosing to bring it in, which is more carbon, you're going to have to pay a tax on top of the taxes you already pay. So businesses are going to have, just named up. We actually have an article published on the MHA website that actually talks about this, #just saying. But
You're depressing us.
But the point is, it's actually a big legal issue as well. But the point is, this stuff is coming. And we've remained very silent as a country on all of this. So you mentioned the Prime Minister's announcements a couple of weeks ago, very much directed at the consumer, I felt, rather than business.
Yeah.
I don't really understand the 9-bin thing or whatever it was. That was a bit news to all of us, I think. But my point is there was no discussion about regulation or legislation about what it's going to mean for companies, like a lot of people here, that import-export and what's happening. So this debate is really important from our perspective.
But just because we're here and we're at the fruit show and we're talking about trees, I think I do want to add a special point to people often when they think about planting trees, don't think about planting fruit trees. But fruit trees are trees. And agroforestry, and thinking about, on your sheep farm, can you plant a hedge with lots of fruit trees in it or nut trees in it? And think about that's a way of storing carbon, it's a way of increasing biodiversity, it's really good for nature, but you can also be producing different crops by planting fruit trees. And I have to advertise Wakeland's Agroforestry, which is the most amazing place if you want to look at how you can do agroforestry really well. And that combination of trees and crops can actually end up being about a third more productive on average than just straight normal arable. So there's all kind of different things. Put trees everywhere. Don't just think about we're creating a patch of forest over there and that's where the trees go. The trees should be everywhere.
Yeah,
Great encouragement for our farmers, thank you.
Yeah. Minette Batters, funny, I was talking about that. Just that the EU, the European trading countries inside or out, but it just needs to be firmed up, and we can't just carry on in this general porridge. Really, there's got to be just and realise we're out. So just make it happen. And the carbon is a really good example of that. And think, right, how's it going to work? But everyone to join in the conversation. Stuart, you've been advising businesses, farms, particularly in the States, up and down the whole country. It must be very difficult for you as well to know what you can and can't suggest and promote, knowing that there's going to be going forward, or if suddenly the goalposts are changed. It must be very difficult when you've advised going down one route.
So I think when we look at opportunities, so we talk about carbon here, whether it's tree planting or sequestration in soils, it's looking at what's right for the business at that time. Is the return justified for the business, for their change in land use, their policy? And you always have to step back and say, well, we know the market's changing, we don't know what price is going to be for carbon for BNG in 5, 10, 20 years, but is the decision right for the business now? And once you've made that decision, you have to sort of park it and not worry about what future returns may or may not have been. So it's every business, it's looking about what's right for the business at that time, and there might be a need for cash for succession or to purchase the farm next door, whatever it might be, and that could be a driver behind the reason for looking at that BNG deal or some neutrality. You've got to look at it really down to every business will be different, and the opportunities will therefore be different for each business. And you'll look at periods of certainty, so where you can lock into government schemes, so countryside stewardship or SFI. If we look to that at the moment, you've got a 5-year or a 3-year agreement, and again, so it's tailoring the opportunities that are there from government or from the private sector to what's right for the business and the timeline that they can commit to. So that's how we approach it with clients generally.
Yeah, and I just wondering with going forward, what are the things that you would particularly like, whoever the government is next time, to firm up on and give you a clear lead? I'm going to ask you all of this, just things that will make your life much clearer. And on the sustainability element particularly, that where you think that, could you give us some clear stewardship? These are areas where I'd like you to lead from the front and give us clarification, Mark. I know it's a big old topic but it's just maybe 2 or 3 things that you just think.
That's a massive question.
Yeah.
So if I'll take it to 3 points. So if I take it from the sort of the British food industry perspective, and that's from tier 1 supply, and who supply obviously the multiples right the way down to tier 4, tier 5. I would say an absolute clarity, and this is with my rural policy group hat on, is that this country is going to commit to being self-sufficient in particular areas and particular lines by a particular date, we say 2030, of a particular percentage. The RPG's principles are 70% by 2030. Amongst, obviously we're not coffee self-sufficient, are we? But we are self-sufficient, we can be in particular areas, poultry, beef, grain. We can look at that. So that's my number 1 point. And I think that will give absolute clarity to business for investment. Every time I talk to business and industry, whether it's PLCs or growers and producers in Kent, they say we're a bit cautious because we don't know what the law of the land's going to look like politically and from a tax jurisdictional perspective. That's number 1. Number 2, clear guidance or a timeline about the implementation of sustainability regulation for smaller businesses. At the moment, it's only large, like over 500 million. It's coming down. Europe have done it. So what is our timeline? Because businesses can then prepare and then decide whether BNG is the right thing for them or not. And the third and probably final thing, which underpins the other 2, is make those decisions, but then please stick to it. I don't know, put it in statute, enshrine it in law. Don't make it a political football. And in that way, businesses, I think, will have a much greater confidence that they can then do those next stages. There is millions of pounds of investment gone into the British food industry since I've been involved in it over the last sort of decade, and there's millions more to go. It's a high technology industry, but it needs that confidence.
Yeah.
And then we also do our bit by the planet by actually starting to strategically reduce our emissions.
Yes, stick to them. And is BNG the way forward? That's a big one, but I'll leave that out there.
Yeah.
And I think, thank you, Mark,
Catherine.
that was great. And I think what I heard there from Mark was certainty. So exactly, we've got to have some clear, joined-up thinking, manageable, workable policies, in particular on environmental issues, and then they've got to be followed through on. So landowners or developers, but the landowners, I think they need to feel that the government trusts and respects them as the sector that is going to not only help sort of obviously feed the nation, but also help us with our environmental policies. And as the largest as farmers, largest landowners across the country, government needs to be placing their trust in them to deliver on our environmental schemes.
Yeah.
Well, I think food security, a government that acknowledges that ensuring its population doesn't starve is a central responsibility of government, is a crucial thing. Now, we have made some progress. Boris Johnson, you might remember him, Prime Minister's back, when asked about food security at the start of COVID, said, that's the job of the supermarkets. We have now made some progress since that. Rishi Sunak held the Farm to Fork Summit in number 10. Basically, everyone said there was no actual content in the Farm to Fork Summit, but there was some acknowledgement from the government. But so saying that to ensure that we cannot keep relying on other people to feed us, we're relying on their soils, their water and their labour, we cannot keep doing that, acknowledging that as a starting point. And the other thing I'd say, particularly focusing on soils, and this is one of my favourite subjects, and the first vote that we ever won in the House of Lords as a Greens, we added briefly soil into the Environment Act as a priority area with air and water, which would have been, if you think about it, the logic of air, water and soil are the absolute foundations of life. We lost it in the Commons. The government promised to take a whole series of steps on soil health and has since dropped the lot. But soil health, we talk about soil carbon and storing soil carbon as a climate action, but what you do to increase carbon in soils is all the things that do to increase soil health, which has to be the foundation of how we produce our food. Artificial fertilisers, there's a huge problem with their energy use, with their environmental impacts. Healthy soils will actually look after themselves. They don't need the fertilisers, they don't need the pesticides with the right management systems. So food security and soil, and a government acknowledging that both of those things are absolutely its business for today and for the future.
Yeah, that's it. And one of the things to hope that if someone does, that there's got to be some form of enshrinement, but actually there's a responsibility they have to take it on. You can't just say we're going to change that, because it is a nightmare to deal with. I fully understand that. Stuart.
And I think picking up on the Catherine's and Mark's points about certainty, but probably coming down to a more sort of macro level, kind of farm estate, land manager level, it's a tax point. So from a day to day now, the big conversation is APR, BPR. And that's actually impacting how people are structuring businesses, how they'll invest going forwards, the treatment of environmental land, so BNG, carbon, from an APR, BPR point of view. So there's a lot of uncertainty around that. And then also looking at the budget for the rural sector. Now we've left the EU, where we rolled from sort of 7 to 10 year budgets, and it would be potentially cross-party. You're looking at every time there's a change in government, will the rural budget change? What will stewardship look like? How much money will be coming into farms and rural businesses? Now, whilst sort of farmers, estates, land managers are very good at adapting and changing to new policy, and they'll follow the pot of money, they'll adapt. With that changing potentially every 5 years, or a lot of uncertainty around that makes it very hard to plan out and make business decisions. That if you look at planting an orchard, that's a 20-year investment. So you could look at 4 changes in government, 4 changes in policy. So there needs to be some certainty around that.
Yeah, absolutely. So politics can be very short-term. Farming certainly isn't, and it's very. If you do again have a question, please just shout. And we'll grab a mic and come amongst you. My wife's the marketing director of TJ Maxx, Vanessa America, HomeSense. Been with them 30 years. So they had no stores in the UK. They've now got 750 throughout 7 countries in Europe. But an American mothership. From Boston, where it's set up, and she goes over there, and because sustainability, they've done all the comic relief T-shirts, they've doubled the world's fair trade planting of cotton, which is great news, and everything, and make sure the farmers get all the right prices. She's been to America quite often, and we'll talk about it to quite big events and captains of industry. But so often she asks the question is, well, what's in it for us? How can we monetize this? And it's all the time, rather than thinking, well, isn't it something that you want to do as a company, or you're on behalf of your staff and to make you feel better? But yeah, that's great. But how can we? Why? Is it going to cost us money? Can we make any money? Is it money neutral? And that's a big question. So again, Mark, you're nodding here, but whether you've heard that so many times in your travels, but also interesting to see where we are as a UK or as opposed to Europe, and certainly to America.
I mean, you just hit the nail on the head, actually. When you talk about sustainability, in every business that we go to, there are two things that matter to companies, and I've said it on this stage before: how much and who's doing it. When you narrow it all the way down, whether it's them, you're going in there, they will be looking at how much is it going to cost me and who's going to do it, because they're going to be looking at core return on investment. Now, that's underpinned by, for some businesses, with are we doing it in the right way, which is the difference between what corporate social responsibility was and ESG, environmental social governance. Now, that was created by the US, actually, as a framework for businesses out there. Then it was obviously migrated into Europe and the wider world. Every business, so take your wife's marketing director of TK Maxx, so global business. They'll be regulated by the SEC, and they'll be regulated for particular statutes for disclosures that they've got to make. They'll have to do that, and they'll have to have it backed up because they'll be audited because they're a global company, right? For some, and then in Europe, they'll have to do the same. So they have
Australia,
to do it.
where they are,
the question is, for some of those big companies, are they doing it because they have to do it, or they're doing it now because they see it as part of their business model? And increasingly, businesses are thinking, well, M&S is a great example. They were one of the first. But their ethical sourcing and their ethical trading won't necessarily determine whether or not somebody shops there. And I know Stuart really well, the CEO. He was head of grocery. What they did was they actually walked the walk. So they've implemented a whole cross-business change, and it's generated them money. But they knew it was a 10-year plan. So when they put that in place, and I was kind of involved in the early stages talking to them about it, they decided that we're not going to get a return for a really long time, but we're going to stick with it. And they've had a couple of CEOs along the way, but they've stuck with it as a board policy, and it's now bearing fruit. For other industries and for other businesses, it's stop, depending on who's the chairman or who's the MD. And I think that's the bit where they get it wrong. So yes, bottom line is a big thing, but you can monetize it in the right way. And I think that's the difference now. For some companies, though, and there'll be farmers here today, £100 million businesses, and I know because I've had the conversation, they'll turn around and go, oh, great, we're in scope for streamlined carbon or ESA, right, what do we have to do to get away with it? We're not interested, we can't see any money on it, what do we have to do? Until their customer, let's say it's, I don't know, a supermarket of note, turns around and goes, what are your environmental policies? Because if we can't see any, we will no longer supply with you or contract to supply, or we will not give you the same price that you've had, I don't know, a pound per kilo of raspberry puree, for example. And they'll stop. That's when businesses get involved. And as brutal as that sounds, that's the reality.
Yes.
And Mark, you were just making me reflect back to I was at the Country Landowners Association Northern Conference, hearing one of the major banks that funds rural businesses saying, well, we soon will not be providing any loans to businesses unless they can show that they've got in place their ESG measures. Yep. So that's one of the other places the control is going to come from.
Yeah, well, that really is good. I'm conscious that you are much better informed on these topics than I am. So I want to, because we've got 15 minutes left, I want to make sure if there's any particular topics that you wanted to bring to the table today, to the panel, which you think need to be looked at, or maybe they are going quite well, or we definitely need some improvement, because this is the time, and other people going, otherwise, I don't want them to, I can't believe they didn't discuss that.
Can we ask you a question?
Just far away.
So, obviously fully briefed. Nice shirt as well. It's not the same, is it? No,
that's red, this is blue. Apart from that, Mark, this is fine.
Going colourblind. You're big in the food industry, obviously.
Yeah, chairman of the Great Taste Awards and the World Cheese Awards.
Have you, and we had Rosemary Schrager on our stand earlier talking food policy. In your world with chefing and restaurants and everything else, are they Is there a cultural change that these business thinking, you know what, we really do need to change the way we do things? We need to have an environmental plan, environmental policy. And I know a lot of these restaurants might be small or they may be chains.
Absolutely, right across the board.
Is it shifting?
Yeah, and it is, and also right up to like companies like Compass and Sodexo, the huge ones, the huge players here in France. They are all definitely not just thinking, oh, we should be doing that. There are people who are definitely driving it on, but you see it in lots of smaller businesses, all over the UK. Looking at it, even things like Marcus Waring getting see-through bin liners, which were able recyclable ones, but also so we could see what people were throwing away. Obviously to save him money, but to make better resources of what if you're going to kill something, eat all of it, nose to tail, but probably eat less of it. I mean, pay more for it, eat less meat generally, all the type of things we're doing in the UK naturally anyway. Other parts of the world maybe are eating more meat, so there's a bit of a balance going on. But as an industry, yeah, definitely. And when you go like the World Cheese Awards, you're looking to see what the cheese that's come in from other parts of the world, what can they do with it? If it can't be eaten, because some of it can't because of their import, they're actually going to burn it and use it for certain fuels, and that's very Norwegian. So I think there is generally a debate, but it's a proper debate. It's not the ones, what's in it for us. It's people really do. And I think the young generation, and we've got 3 lads, 17, 21, 23, and is there something that I do hear much more? I've seemed to be across it. I might be naive and think, well, it's just them, but they're mates. But I do think generally the next generation, because what we're handing on to them isn't great, all the things we talked about, the summers, there is a cyclical nature obviously of climate, but in the last decade and 5 years particularly, we know that it's gone way out of kilter. So I think to answer in a big way, yes, there is happening, and more so, and it's a debate. But I have every show I go, anything I've been, it does come up. Thank goodness, and I think people aren't just paying lip, like water, for instance, not just in disposable plastics. Where it's from, but you can reuse the bottles and all the time and everything, and the way you clean them and wash them. How much of your precious water are you using, if water is precious. Are there any other topics again? Yes, thanks.
If I can bring up the issue of public health.
Yeah.
And, we hear from the government all the time concern about, the impact on the economy, the impact on productivity, the fact that we are a deeply unhealthy society. And, there's so many things behind that, but one of the things behind that is the fact that 56% of British calories come from ultra-processed foods. And we're here, I'm just looking over at a wonderful display of apples over in the background there at the moment. But I did an event for the Westminster Forum on novel foods, and we were talking about all these grand ideas of making food out of insects and irradiating mushrooms so they have more vitamin D and all this sort of stuff. And at the end I said from the chair, I think there should be more novel foods in the British diet. Let's have some fruit and vegetables. That would be a novel food in the British diet. And, the advice, the government advice and the government Eat Well plate is absolutely dreadful and nothing like what the nutritionists, our current nutritionists say it should be. It's 5 a day vegetables and fruit, but actually the nutritionists say it should be 10 a day vegetables and fruit. It was a sociologist who said, well, look, people are only eating 2.5, and if you tell them to go 10, they're just going to give up. So they've said 5, but it should be 10 a day. And if we actually did that and got a genuinely healthy diet, growing far less grains and oils on a global scale, ending the factory waste, the food waste that is factory farming, because you think about it, we're taking what's mostly perfectly good grains and oils and feeding them to animals to get a much smaller quantity out. And you do a rough back of the envelope calculation, we need to be growing about 20 times as much vegetables and fruit as we are in the UK. And that sounds like an enormous change, and it is. But let's look at the fact that sugar beet figures out this week. Sugar beet acreage in the UK is about the same as the total vegetables and fruit. So we've got the same amount of land dedicated to growing sugar when we have 2.5 times much sugar as we need. Let's turn some of that wonderful, some of the best land we can get in East Anglia, turn it to growing vegetables and fruit. Let's grow vegetables and fruit all over the country, which we could, and work towards a healthy diet, and let's see if we can tell the government that's good for the economy.
Absolutely, and my farming clients would be absolutely thrilled to hear that, and obviously if that was policy or practice that could be implemented would be great. But how are we going to get there when they can't get a reasonable price for their produce as it currently stands?
Yeah, yes, and also the biggest point is there, but would be great. The only thing is either where will we get the sugar from, or the idea is obviously we eat less of it. That's the key. But that, unless that really is taken seriously, when Henry Dimbleby resigned, I remember it was a black day. It's been mentioned a couple of times today, earlier on in the day. Someone who really did care. He spoke to so many people, me being one, lots of people in industry. But when they then really just didn't take his advice, and he thought, bollocks to it, that's enough. I can't, you can only give so much of yourself to it.
We contributed to that, and so with the RPG hat on, it's not the day job, and I don't know how much you introduced it. So it was put together to raise people's awareness of how important the rural sector is. So every year the RPG takes a county and they value it as if it were, and report it as if it was a PLC. So we did Kent, I think 2020, I think maybe. We then did Lincolnshire last year, so that must have been 2022 actually, 21-22. And Lincolnshire's agri-rural value is 3 times the size of Kent, 15 point something billion. We thought Kent was massive, it's about 5 billion, which is roughly the same size as Sainsbury. Lincolnshire is more like ABF, Associated British Foods. But it puts it into context when you think about how bad that is in the stock market perspective. These are global giants, right? And people don't understand the value of the food chain. So that's what RPG was set up to look at that and promote and raise it. We say 2 things, and you just mentioned one. The challenge with pricing and market, you said how much does the producer get, is a big part of the RPG. So we have 2 priorities. One, a fair distribution of the food price margin. So how that's split up and transparent. And people do have a pop at the supermarkets, but you look at their margins and their returns, it's a different model and it's got to be understood more clearly. And there is a little bit smoke and mirrors. Welcome to corporate accounting, right? It's the first thing. The second thing is 70% self-sufficiency for the UK in those streams. So they're the 2 priorities. And organisations like this are designed to get behind British industry or British food industry and get that voice heard in government. And it is doing that. And debates like this are really valuable. You get the perspective from land agents, very respectable land agents, lawyers, politicians, and it goes into Westminster. The challenge is who talks about it in Westminster. And at the moment, food is perceived a little bit as a political football. It was all over the news when the prices went up. People said, I can't afford to shop in the supermarket, it's too expensive. Comparatively, that jump in food price was massive, but all it did was starting to align with the pricing in Europe. We're still cheap. But the problem is, as Natalie rightly said, it's what's cheap and what's not cheap. Yeah. Fresh produce and diet and the way in which we shop is different to the way in which they shop in Europe. I'm in Europe a lot, and you see it's a totally different perspective. I always, just brief aside, a friend of mine, when I was at Hadlow, used to spend a lot of time in France, and you always used to say that motorway services in France were like going into a restaurant in the UK. Going to the motorway services in the UK is like going somewhere else. Let's leave it at that. And just see, but that's a really...
Oh, yeah.
And he said that 15 years ago, and I think that's the same now. So it's a whole combination, as you said, and we talked this morning, diet, value, perception. How much do people value fruit? Well, our colleague Rosemary Schroeder decided to test a couple of the exhibits by eating the strawberries, so apologies for any growers in the audience. If you're 1 or 2 strawberries less, it's because Rosemary tasted them. Sorry.
No.
But she was doing her thing. But the point is, how do we value it?
And I suppose picking up on that with the reference to the French motorway stations, which you're quite right are fabulous, how do we get that cultural shift?
Yeah.
And people need to know where their food comes from. Are we educating our children correctly in that regard? And the hard work that's gone into it. So we're fortunate enough to live on the outskirts of Goudhurst. Garden backs onto the farmers' orchards. Yeah, okay, we've done a quick head count. I think it's an orchard with about 500,000 apples. We might scrump the odd one, but I always tell my children, actually, that's the farmer's hard work. Yeah. That is his labour. Do not be taking more than one on your dog walk. And I think we really need to show that sort of recognition of what our farmers do and be prepared to pay for it properly, in essence.
Yeah, it must be as well. Stuart, buying and advising businesses and moving them forward as farmers and trying to sell a farm or estate, not to people who have got lots of money for elsewhere and they're putting it into it, but ones who are trying to make it as a going concern. And very tricky to say, right, because this is how you can make money out of this farm estate. But if you don't know exactly about the legislation where it's going to be, it's like when the quotas changed and everyone started getting out of milk to make butter or cheese. It's because they had to, not because they wanted to. It's just there wasn't the money around. And for you to advise that, it must be really, hand on heart, saying this is the business, the way it is now, this is how you can make money. But crystal ball gazing must be part of it, and tricky at that.
I think as a sector, probably it's only your top 20-25% or less of trading entities that are making money from the agricultural element. So the majority of businesses that we work with, they're propped up by diversification.
Yeah, which is another point, yes.
So whether it's your BNG coming, whether it's the holiday lets, we're lucky in the southeast because there's a lot of other opportunities for land. So actually, I think the start of your question, farmers buying farmland to farm it, actually that doesn't really happen from profit. It's because you've sold land for development, because there's another opportunity. That's where cash comes from. So there's very few farming businesses that will invest to expand the farming operations purely from farming profit, because it's not there in the sector. And that's, I think, on the points that everyone's picked up on about food security and hitting 70% food security, growing more fruit, growing more veg. Well, that's great, but the consumer's got to pay for it, and that doesn't happen. So we're in the National Fruit Show in a sector that is pretty rock bottom at the moment, with lots of producers leaving, lots of producers grubbing up orchards because it doesn't make money. And if we want as a country to be 70% self-sufficient and strive on these things, there's if I was going to play devil's advocate to the points that have been raised, they're all great and they're all really good talk, but it doesn't get delivered. It's been talked about before. Food prices are still really low. They're the lowest in Europe, and nothing's really changing about that.
Sorry to cut off, but this story, so I get kind of not agitated but frustrated, is been in this industry for probably on and off 20 years. Well, I don't say that, I'm not that old. 15 years. Let's go 15, makes me look young.
Sorry.
Steady on. But my point is, we've been having the same narrative about education back when I was dealing with with Hadler Group. It still hasn't changed, and it comes back to, as Dara said, I'm sorry, I'm looking at Natalie, I know you're not in government, but a consistent approach to government that nails it down. And you're right about, I agree with everything you just said, and it's incredibly frustrating. But farmers and producers also need to get behind agencies. I'm not just saying RPG, but whether it's NFU or anything else, get behind and become a single voice, because there's too much disparate talk, and this has been going on for so many years. How many groups have been popped up over the last 20 years going, we're going to sort this out, whether it's in Peterborough, Lincolnshire, Colchester, Rochester, whatever, and then nothing happens. They're just talking shops. And what these debates are designed to do is to actually come out with action and go into Westminster, which it does. Yeah. But you need to have a receptive government, and I think, irrespective, there has been a series of governments that haven't been necessarily as receptive to food. The previous Labour government actually wasn't bad. It wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible. Whereas at the minute, I think the fruit industry is having a tougher time. Market pricing is tough. Certainly those at tier 2 and tier 3, dealing with those people that then deal with the supermarkets, it's really hard. So you don't want the industry to shrink. I'm looking at you because I know you probably deal with a lot of the disposals. But there's got to be a way that the industry come together more effectively. And events like this, looking at you, need to try and do that.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely.
I don't have the answer.
I'm going to come in with something positive, because I think it's about time we had.
We are going to. By the way, that was going to.
That wasn't supposed to be negative. That was a call to action.
Some positives.
Okay. Well, actually, the first written questions I put down to the government 4 years ago was about public procurement. It was about food being organic, local, small producer food going into hospitals, schools, and prisons. The answer I got from the government was, we don't know and we don't care. You can actually look them up. They were the first written questions I asked. We now have a government that's consulting on 50% procurement, public procurement. And if you look at continental Europe, 10 or 15 years ago, a huge advance that they've made in organics far ahead of us. A lot of it was driven by public procurement. And there's cities in Europe where basically the school kids eat 97% organic food from small local growers. So we have actually seen an acceptance, and I have no idea what the Labour policy is, but so far as we're concerned, we should be using 100% procurement for schools, hospitals, prisons, etc., healthy food, and that could be a good, stable, secure supply. Just to mention, picking up what Stuart said, of course we also need to think about how do we get new entrants. we can't just operate on the people we have operating now. There's so many people who'd love to get into growing into farming. We've got to find the space, the land available to them. And just if people don't know, I'll mention the Kindling Trust in Manchester. They train people to start out as small-scale growers and farmers. One of their big struggles is to find land for them. And they sell half of the supplies to the 2 biggest universities in Manchester. And they do it on an open book basis. So they don't bargain on price. They go to the university and the university says, oh, we need 10 tonnes of leeks this year. The growers say, right, here's our books, we need to be paid this for the leeks. And the university says yes or no. There's no bargaining. So that is setting out the model of working out what's a fair price for these leeks, what's a fair price for these apples, and an acknowledgement that the university is going to pay that fair price. And that's the kind of direction we need to go in. In public procurement, it can be a significant force for doing that.
I'm just going to ask you on that note, is to just come up with something that you think has worked over the last few years and actually been a positive thing, but it's in your industries, or something you've been aware of that's made you think, actually we've got that right, hallelujah, well done, let's talk about it. Let's finish this panel on a high. Yeah. Stuart, just said. I'm sorry, kid.
I will start. I think BNG could be a really good opportunity. It might not be perfect. It's better than what exists at the moment. There's a great opportunity for landowners, farmers to monetize it and benefit financially, but also if it's done right, it should deliver for the environment.
Clarity, done right, that's the key within that. Catherine.
Well, in the legal sector, we're looking to the introduction of much more use of AI. So hopefully you'll find that your lawyers get more efficient and possibly even a bit cheaper.
Oof, hey, how did I get that in writing? Mark.
I was going to say AI.
Well,
we're at a global conference.
You can draft
tomorrow.
my documents for me.
Yeah.
Throw in some information.
Actually, I'm going to say, and it's going to sound a bit controversial, food price, it's gone up. I think that's a good thing because it has enabled businesses to start to, well, it's enabled the narrative to look at the supply chain. And we weren't looking at this a year ago. So despite this tough stuff on cost of living, I think the pricing of food going up is definitely a good thing. I'm not saying long may it continue, but I'm saying let's get the debate widened, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, food has been too cheap, too long, and it's a
Agreed.
good debate about it. And if we can make it nutritionally beneficial, well, that's the whole point. And it's so obvious. It's a conversation we can have in 5 minutes. When you need to inspire people. It doesn't need months of debate sometimes, but a political will to go with it. Hallelujah, let's hope we get that. I'm delighted that you've grown up in Sydney, lived in Bangkok, and that we've actually got you in the UK and you're here, and we were delighted to have you one of our greatest Australian imports. But Natalie, so thank you very much. Stuart, good luck with that. When you did say that there's no brass in farming, as they say where I'm from, long term, but that's maybe the reality of it all. So what are we going to help farms out with? Agritourism, all the different elements where they don't have to sell it off the building unless building's really required, for many people. So that's, I hope your sector thrives and does whichever hat you have to wear. And also, and then to get lawyers and accountants sitting next to each other, but also rural policy where you do care, you really care, and you can see that, not just for your businesses, but all the advice you give to all your different clients. So, Mark and Catherine, thank you very much. Catherine, indeed, Natalie, Stuart, Mark, thank you so very much. It's been excellent, and we've covered a lot of ground. Well done.